look, I think there were many people, I was one of those, that hoped that, he would rise to the occasion as president and aspire to lead our nation instead of dividing it. And, it's obvious his political model and governing model is to divide. And he has not risen to the occasion. It's very evident to me. I've had personal meetings, personal dinners, personal phone calls when the staff has asked me to call over and intercede on something that was not going to happen, that was not good for our country.
Oh, the battle between Senator Bob Corker and President Trump is not over yet. Now the Republican from Tennessee apparently not ruling out a run for president in 2020. Trump first went after Corker on Twitter a few weeks ago, and Corker tweeted back, calling the White House a, quote, adult daycare center. Joining us now, John Hart, former communications director for Oklahoma Republican Senator Tom Coburn and founder and CEO of Mars Hill Strategies, and Don Calloway, former Democratic Missouri state representative and founder of Pine Street Strategies. Thank you both for being here today.
Thanks for having us.
Well, here's essentially what Corker said. It's way too early to decide whether to compete for the Republican nomination. So that's the type of thing. You guys have both been in politics for a long time. That's the type of thing people say before they casually make a trip to Iowa and head off to New Hampshire. So what do you think the chances are, John?
Well, I don't know. It's really going to depend on three things: the state of the economy. James Carville is still right. It's still the, quote, economy stupid. If the economy is growing in 2020, I don't think Trump will have a major challenge. It's going to depend on what happens in the midterms in 2018 and also the state of the world. I think if either of those go haywire, I think you could see a primary challenge. And look, quite frankly, I'm in favor of incumbents being challenged. My former boss, Tom Coburn, challenged the establishment pick in 2004. And I think Trump should welcome a challenge because it would make him a better president. And if he loses, we'll get a better president. So the voters win in either case. And look, Molly, I think we need to step back and think about how do we define loyalty in this country and in politics. That loyalty does not mean fidelity to any particular party or politician. Instead, it means fidelity to the Constitution and the American idea. And in our system, elections are a competition. They're not a coronation. So Trump really should deflect this by welcoming any challenge from Bob Corker, Jeff Flake. And, Ben Sasse would be a much more formidable opponent than Corker would be. But it really is too soon to predict if that's going to come to pass.
Yeah, I have heard a little talk about, as you mentioned, Ben Sasse. Don, I want to bring you in here. We haven't even gotten to the midterms yet, and here we are talking a Corker 2020 possibility. What are your thoughts on that?
Senator Corker is a very smart and savvy politician. He's been in this game a long time, so he understands as well as anybody that to primary the president would be at best a quixotic mission. Senator Corker has essentially lame ducked himself by announcing that he's not seeking re-election next year, so he has to do whatever he can to stay relevant. And I don't mean that as a diss to him, but he's got to make sure that he is still active and top of mind and therefore still a threat in the legislature and not just taken for granted. But ultimately, any savvy politician knows that you don't do something like this even with this president's historically low approval ratings, because the rating is not that low when you consider it isolated among groups of high voting propensity Republicans. Ultimately, my friend Doug, sitting right now having a Budweiser in Alexandria, Virginia, has a much better shot of winning than Senator Corker does, and he knows that.
Well, Congress, of course, has the low approval ratings as well, and so many times challengers come from Congress, be they senators or congressmen. There has been some pretty nasty back and forth between these guys, and as you know, the president has said he always hits back. So no matter who a primary challenger may or may not be, I mean, we could see pretty nasty back and forth as a possibility. Is that something that should be considered, John?
Well, no, I think sure, there's already a lot of nasty back and forth happening. And I think, the president has to take responsibility for that as the leader of the party, is that ultimately this is happening under his watch. And if the party isn't unified, he has no one to blame but himself. And I don't say that out of bitterness. That's how the reality of it works. And so the joke that, the friend Doug may run, it's like, well, there may be an effort to recruit someone or anyone to take on Trump because there has not been enough unity that's been produced in the party. No one can really define what Trumpism means or what Bannonism. Even Steve Bannon admits that he can't define what Trumpism means. So really, the ball is in the president's court to unify the party. And yes, I think it's not likely Corker will do this. He's doing this to keep the conversation alive, to create an opening for someone else, whether it's Ben Sasse or another more likely opponent. But again, the president is the one that needs to unify the party, unify the country, and end any talk that there could be a primary against him in 2020.
Yeah, Don, I want to bring you in here because will it matter what happens between now and then as to whether or not he'll face a primary challenge and just how powerful that primary challenge could be? And what will it be about? Will it be about how the midterms go? Will it be about the economy? I mean, what are the risks? What are the factors that could encourage that primary challenger?
Well, I think you just named them. It's always about the economy. It's always about the state of the world, as John led with at the top of the segment. And of course, a 9/11 could always happen, something terrible that the president is widely seen to have mishandled. But John and I live here in the bubble in D.C., and Molly, you're in New York. I always have to think about Iowa, and I think about Missouri, and I think about heartland mainstream Republicans. And are they really upset with this president such that there is daylight for even a credible Republican challenger? I would also point out the very practical element that Senator Corker will not be in the Senate in 2019 and 2020 during the heat of that campaign. It will be very, very difficult for him to access the millions and millions of hundreds of millions of dollars by not being in the Senate. He will have a very difficult time raising sufficient funds to be able to mount a credible challenge by not being a sitting member of Congress, particularly the Senate. So, you know, you could see a credible challenger. It's happened in modern politics once in my lifetime when Senator Kennedy primaried President Carter. But I really, really have a hard time seeing that a sensible, credible challenger would do something of this nature.
John brought up something, sorry, the other way around. But when we're talking about middle America and all across, President Trump, his campaign, seemed to see something in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, that other campaigns missed, that other Republicans and Democratic campaigns missed, that looking for something different. Will he be able to hang on to that differentness, that he's not the traditional politician that drew so many people into the political process that hadn't been drawn in before?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. I would just say, for the record, I'm from Kansas. I'm not from D.C., so I understand middle America, or at least I certainly hope to. But, no, Molly, that's a great question, because you hit on the fact that Trump really appealed to voters who felt disenfranchised. And, look, a third of the counties that Obama won went for Trump. So that is a very significant point. And so the question comes down to is, will those voters believe that Trump has delivered enough of a difference in 2020 to support him again? But it does show that his constituency, his base, is a lot more diluted and thin than I think he understands. So you know, I agree with Don. Look, if there's not a big problem in the economy, if there's not something happening in the world, if the midterms go okay, it's going to be a very, very steep uphill climb. But historically, you know, look, midterms are not friendly to the president's party. More than, I think it's 90% of the time, the president's party loses seats in midterm elections, and that's since Reconstruction. And half the time, it's a margin bigger than the House majority. So there's a real chance Republicans could lose not just the House but the Senate, and then that will change the dynamic where you could have sitting senators being willing to primary a president they believe has taken the party and the country in a destructive direction. All
right, Don, and just a quick final thought from you before we head off.
You know, Senator Corker has to do what he has to do to stay an effective legislator for some very, very important legislative projects, tax reform, immigration reform, that happen over the next 15 months while he's still sitting. I just really have a hard time seeing that he could do this. But John is absolutely correct that the state of the world will dictate whether or not this president gets a primary after 2018, after the midterms. But I really just don't see it. It's too much of a lift. It's too much of a feasible climb.
All right, Don Calloway, John Hart, thank you both for joining me here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Molly.
Thanks, Molly.